Everyone. My name is Lauren Sosdian and I'm a consultant at Auxentia. We are a small consultancy and we work with clients all over the world to further the objectives of their innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology commercialization outcomes. Today, I will be speaking about research commercialization, why it matters, and how to do it. I will demonstrate and highlight some tips and tools to use when working with researchers on how to communicate their research to a non-specialist audience. The content behind this case study comes from 2 years of expertise, delivering workshops across several countries, and I anticipate that some of these tools might be useful for other entrepreneurship educators. So, why communicate your research? There generally is a responsibility to make sure that the information going out into the wider public is accurate, not distorted, to be made more flashy and catchy for news headlines. It can help researchers build their academic reputation in their field. It can help inspire and encourage a stronger presence of research in society. And as a lot of research is publicly funded, there is some level of responsibility on the researcher to communicate the results back to the public as a key stakeholder. And fundamentally, it makes researchers better. There's a great quote at the bottom of this slide by Nicholas Spitzer who says, "When I speak publicly, I appreciate the need to step back and present the big picture. And in doing so, put details into a larger context that is much more accessible and much more memorable for an audience. This has stimulated me to think about larger questions over the years and has influenced the directions of my research." There was a great article last year in Nature magazine for their 150th anniversary that really highlighted the plethora of multidisciplinary research collaborations that are going on right now across the world. So there's a good image here on the right-hand part of the slide that is showing all of the different, I'm not sure how many hundreds of research projects they looked at, but it's showing all of the links between lots of different areas across the sciences. And so, being able to communicate effectively beyond your immediate peers to allow for these collaborations builds support for your research area. It promotes understanding of the wider relevance to society and encourages informed decision-making across all levels. So there's lots of benefits to research communication in addition to the multidisciplinary research trends that we're seeing at the moment. So, if you have good research, if you're able to communicate your research well, it allows researchers to be better teachers and mentors for the next generation of researchers. Those researchers that can communicate well are more likely to collaborate with industry or receive funding from industry. Impact and outreach are becoming increasingly important, not only to encourage those multidisciplinary collaborations, but it's also in terms of demonstrating impact and outreach in the research funding applications is becoming more common. So those researchers who are effective at communicating are more likely to give significant talks at conferences. They can successfully network to build collaborations with other labs and work with other research groups as well. So why do researchers struggle with communicating their research? I think the best way to sum it up in terms of my experience as a former researcher and working with lots of researchers is something called the curse of knowledge. So all that really means is that when you, as the researcher, or really as an expert in any field, know something really well, it can be hard to remember, what it was like 10 years ago when you started your PhD or when you started working in this area, what it was like to not know about it at all. And there's a great table on this slide here that shows how terms have different meanings for researchers and the public. So, something like a theory, we use that a lot in science to say that, this is, kind of a proven, concept that exists in my area. But if you say that in the public sphere, they can often think of that as, oh, that means like a sort of a hunch or a speculation. So this table is kind of just showing you some alternatives to use some of those scientific terms. And of course, this is just talking about one or two scientific terms, but when you think about reading an entire research article, a lot of that to be able to communicate to the public will need to be written and talked about quite differently. So one of the ways that Auxentia works with researchers to teach them how to more effectively communicate this research is through a workshop that we call our Toolkit Sprint. So it's a series of short exercises designed to keep participants engaged and get them thinking about their research in a different way. So we often have groups from anywhere from 30 to sort of 70 researchers. We've worked with PhD students, we've worked with postdocs. And what we do is we get them into small groups, about 6 or so, at different tables. And participants are given a prompt to write about. So these are intended as short sort of sound bites of information that the participants can take away and use in their everyday work. So they have 5 minutes to work on this prompt individually, so it's sort of silence in the room. And then after the time is up, we give them 5 minutes to discuss in their small groups. And then we reserve between 5 and 10 minutes to share with the entire room. So that's facilitated by the consultant leading the workshop. So the benefits of this design of workshop is that each prompt is very brief. And so if participants are struggling with that prompt, or they find it doesn't exactly suit their research, they can help someone else in their group when it comes to the group activity stuff, and then move on in the next exercise. And I think what I've noticed is one of the key benefits of doing this exercise is by placing researchers in multidisciplinary small groups. So we often will have social scientists working with theoretical physicists on the same table. In getting them to do those small group activities, what we're asking them to do is work with their peers and think, okay, does this statement make sense to me? Do I understand this? Is this a helpful way to explain this concept? And by getting someone else's opinion, who is also very educated, very qualified, that can, I think, really reaffirm to some researchers who might think, oh, this is, quite easy to understand. Having a colleague or a peer say, actually, I don't necessarily understand that, can really encourage researchers to think about how they frame their research in a different way. So the 6 exercises that we commonly use, I will walk through those right now. So one of the first exercises that we use is called the research question and the gap. So this sort of goes up on a big display in the room, and we get researchers with a pen and paper, a bit old-fashioned. We get them to describe the research question that they're trying to answer and how existing research doesn't cover it. So I've put an example down below, and then I always sort of give them the 5 minutes individually to work on their own responses. If it looks like anyone's struggling, I can go up to them and work with them. Sometimes this can be quite challenging for those who are in the sort of theoretical science fields or perhaps the social science fields, because they're not necessarily trying to solve a problem, but really just answer a question or fill in the gaps in their research area. The second question, or the second writing prompt, is getting them to think about the scale of the problem that they're solving. So this is, we sort of frame that as, and write down as many important statistics as you can think about that describe the size of the problem that you are solving. So I once actually worked with a woman who was researching, she was doing some sort of museum research in sort of art history and looking at how different paintings and how they sort of influenced culture. And she said, well, I'm not solving a problem. There's no numbers. Everything is sort of qualitative. And so I actually just spent some time sitting with her and talking to her about, how many, museums are you visiting, or how many paintings, are you researching for your project? And so just getting her to explain helped me to understand actually what she was doing, and how she was actually looking at quite a specific sort of time period and number of artistic pieces for her PhD. So the third exercise we get researchers to think about is, we call it why now. So tell me why the audience should care that you are doing your research right now, versus why does it need to be done now? Maybe it could be done in sort of 10 years time. So I've given an example there, say someone was looking at categorizing the changes in sea levels and temperatures, that knowledge can maybe help contribute to the development of new climate change strategies, for example. The second 3 exercises are listed here. So one of my favorite ones is called the Gaddy pitch. There's a lot of great examples of this online. And really, it's another way, to simply introduce your research that anyone can understand. So it's kind of framed in, how, and then put in the concept that people will understand. Well, what I'm researching is this, and in fact, I've already tested over 700 samples and found preliminary evidence shows X, Y, and Z. So it's just a nice, concise way to get people to write sort of their whole research project in about ideally 3 sentences, which is a lot trickier than it sounds. Second to last is getting researchers to tell us about their unique advantage. So what is a unique quality about your research or situation that no one else has? And my favorite responses from this one is that, well, there's nothing unique, you know, loads of people are doing this. I don't really know what you mean. And then I was working with a group of postdoc students who actually said, after sort of a 5-minute conversation with them, they actually said, well, we are actually the only research lab in Spain that has access to this telescope. And I said, well, that's actually quite interesting, and that's something that's unique about your project. And it says why you have to do this research at this institution in Spain right now, versus, you know, you could be anywhere in the world to be able to do this. And finally, we get them to tell us about traction, which is probably a word that we use a bit more sort of in entrepreneurship education, when we get startups to tell us about, you know, how much success have they demonstrated so far. But in terms of, when we think about it in research, we would like the researchers to quantify sort of how far along are you in your research, and not, oh, I'm 2 years into my PhD, but actually giving some concrete evidence of, you know, we've tested our software on over 46 scans of properties, and, you know, preliminary evidence shows that our software actually reduces the processing time from 6 hours to 17 minutes, for example. So this whole exercise probably takes between 1.5 hours to 2 hours. It depends on how obviously engaged they are and how much the sort of group share time takes. At the end of the exercise, probably the best bit is getting them to reflect on doing all of these exercises, asking them what their thoughts on the most difficult parts of the exercise were, which exercises were the most difficult, what was actually quite easy. Which situations do they see themselves, you know, using some of this information? Because ideally, at the end of this whole 2 hours, they should have, you know, a sheet or 2 of paper with lots of different sort of concise statements about their research, some numbers surrounding it, you know, a couple of sentences that they can use when someone who doesn't know anything about their research asks them to say, you know, describe your research in 2 sentences to me. We asked them how they would, you know, do they see this being used in their everyday research life, maybe on grant applications or networking events, for example. These things can be very useful. And then also getting them, one of the things we talk about is, you know, depending on who your audience is, how do you sort of change the information that you're presenting? So if you're speaking to a high school class, or, you know, you're speaking to a university level class, or if you're speaking at a networking event or at a conference, how does all of this information change? Or if you're speaking, you know, on a live TV segment, if you're that lucky. So I think a lot of these exercises do translate quite well into entrepreneurship education. At Auxentia, we do a lot of training with early stage entrepreneurs, especially those working in sort of, you know, the deep tech world. And so using some of these exercises for those experts to sort of, you know, when you say, what's your business about, or what does your tech do? Using some of these kind of concepts and ideas, working with the entrepreneurs to get them to explain their technology in a way that everyone can understand. I have a background in biomedical devices and biomedical engineering. And so my knowledge of science generally is all right, but I do often, you know, find it difficult to understand things like, you know, theoretical physics. And so working with someone, to be able to sort of translate what they're doing in a way that everyone can understand it is really incredibly valuable. And it can also really contribute well to particularly pitch decks, and I think networking as well. Right, that's it from me today. Thank you very much. I hope you found this session useful and interesting, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end of the session.